Asyle, Tropical Island Survival, Week 30, Day 1. It's a new week, and time to get to work mining. I did my morning chores and got the explosives machine started on making the fuses and anfo tubes, while I went to the caves and started drilling pilot holes for the explosives. Fortunately, it wasn't a very long walk. I came back after an hour to reset the machine for making the nitroglycerin blasting caps, before heading back down to finish drilling the blasting holes and set the anfo tubes and fuses. I like this new system of installing the explosives first thing in the morning, because it means I can minimize the amount of time that I have to have volatile compounds near my base or on my person. I didn't bother trying to cover the blasting caps with concrete when they were done this time. I just installed them and got on with it, putting on my armor, which was a bit of a tight squeeze getting into this particular lava tube, lighting the fuse, and waiting for the bomb to go off. Fortunately, I seemed to be getting good at this, because the bomb went off without a hitch. I collected the scattered ore, loaded it into the ore grinder, and had lunch. It's already been a pretty productive morning. After my break, I decided there was no point wasting time, and repeated the process I did this morning, tackling another ore site and getting the explosives synthesized while I worked. Of course, I had to say what I did about getting good at making explosives, because this round karmically failed to ignite. I spent the requisite waiting hour digging a new doorway in the panic room, using my survey sticks to carefully measure the direction and downward angle I wanted the tunnel to follow. My hope was that I would be able to meet in the middle from the lava tube below, and in so doing, minimize any risk of damaging the panic room itself, if anything, damaging the tunnel instead. While I was in the middle of digging, I heard the explosives go off, so I was relieved that I waited this time. I went to have a look, but the explosion wasn't nearly as strong as usual, probably because the nitroglycerin started something closer to a deflagration than a detonation. Still, I collected what ore had been scattered, and dumped it in the ore grinder. While I was in the workshop, I took what iron ore had been separated, and dumped it directly into the electrolysis tub to get that process started again. There wasn't much, as I've mostly been targeting copper ore, but I'll take what I can get and smelt the copper ore down at the end of the week. I then got ready for bed, but before I fell asleep, I remembered to start the nitric acid bubbler, since my stockpile of nitric acid had finally been depleted to what I considered a safe level. Week 30, Day 2. Back to the blast. After my morning chores, I started the same routine as yesterday, drilling holes and making explosives, but the first round failed again, so I got back to digging while I waited. It didn't escape my attention, though, that I'm starting to treat my explosives with a level of mundanity that could get me easily killed if I lose my fear of them too much. After an hour, I carefully reset the blasting cap and lit a new fuse, which fortunately set it off. I had a late lunch and started over at a different vein, but it was almost like the explosives were taunting me today, as this bomb failed too. I waited, did some more digging, and started to reach what I believed to be bedrock by the time my hour was up. Once again, I replaced the blasting cap and tried to figure out what was going wrong. My best guess was that, because I've been loading the nitro right away, I haven't been giving it enough time for the ethanol to evaporate and increase its potency, like I had before. Tomorrow, I think I'll put a little less ethanol in the nitroglycerin mix, and try putting a wad of nitrocellulose next to it to make sure the fuse sets it off from now on. For today at least, I got it to blow, collected my ore, and got ready for bed. Week 30, Day 3. I did my chores, prepped the explosives, and this time finally got a boom that went off correctly. Changing the mixture seems to have helped, though it makes me more nervous now about transporting the blasting caps to the blast site. That took care of the last major ore site I could find in that network of lava tubes. They really weren't that rich in ore, and I counted myself lucky to have gotten as much as I did. I stopped for lunch, but my blasting wasn't over yet, as it was time to start carefully working on that escape tunnel. I somewhat underloaded that round of explosives because I was more concerned with digging a neat tunnel and avoiding bringing the roof crashing down on top of me. I might have been a bit too conservative, though, causing the hole in the rock face to be a bit smaller than I was hoping. I spent some time opening it up a bit with my pickaxe to make sure I could properly reach the next blasting spot tomorrow, before going to bed. A bit more exhausted than usual, though at least only physically this time. Week 30, Day 4. More setbacks. After my chores, I started drilling my pilot holes, but the shaft of my portable drill snapped, so I had to stop and replace it, performing a bit of preventative maintenance on it while I was in the workshop. I then got ready to light off another bomb, but while I was moving the blasting caps, one of them went off in my hand. Fortunately, it was in a container, and I was wearing gloves and goggles, but it left me pretty shaken, feeling like I was being properly punished for getting too comfortable with them. I moved the blasting caps more carefully afterwards, wearing the bomb suit the whole time, and set off the explosives before having lunch and taking a bit of a breather. I'll be glad when I don't have to deal with this anymore, but I have to press on. I estimated it would take one more blast to break through to the escape tunnel, and my estimates proved correct. I ended up being a little closer than I anticipated, and made a bit of a pocket in the clay tunnel, causing a chunk of the ceiling to collapse. My angles were also a little off, causing the tunnels to meet at a bit of a crooked angle, and with a bit of a step up between them. I can fix this tomorrow, but for now, I've decided to take a bit of a break before going to bed. Week 30, Day 5. I was relieved that I didn't have to do any more blasting today, and after my morning chores, I started clearing out the escape tunnel. The risk of cave-ins concerned me, so when I was done clearing the rubble and carving out what I considered to be a good shape for the tunnel and a few good stair steps, I decided to cut down some bamboo and make reinforcements for the ceiling. Finally, I mixed up some concrete and clay to fill up the gaps in the tunnel network, so it would be much more resistant to cave-ins. I left some room for hooks into the scaffolding to hang lights on later. The tunnel was narrow and claustrophobic because I wanted to minimize the amount of explosives I would need to open it up, but it worked. I now have easy access to the lava tube from my panic room. I stopped for a lunch break and started thinking about the next stage of this little project, namely building some doors to keep me from being ambushed through the tunnels. There are two major points that need to be protected. The first is obviously the actual entrance to the panic room, and the second is a three-way junction in the lava tube, leading to two different exits, one near the caldera, and one in the forest off to the west of the base, which is where I've been lugging most of my equipment through so far. These points could also use some access control, but I think they can wait. I decided that I wanted to have some fun with these doors, so for the door in the panic room, I decided to make an alcove that'll rotate on bearings, like something out of a Scooby-Doo episode. Anyone entering the panic room won't have any idea where I've gone, and will either be confused looking for where I went in, or will go out searching in random directions. Either way, it'll give me more time to escape. On top of that, I think it would be a nice spot to mount my armor and keep it out of the way. In fact, I'm thinking of giving it some kind of pressure plate, so that the armor itself is the key to unlocking it. That way, no one can follow me without lugging something equally heavy into the alcove. As for the junction, I'd like to take another play straight out of the Mist and Riven playbook and make a rotating passageway that only allows passage at a certain angle. Obviously, I could simply make a rotating wall or door that allows 2 passages to be connected, but not all 3 at once. This would at least restrict attack to a single direction at a time. However, the tunnels in the lava tube are already at angles that don't lend themselves to a straightforward junction, almost being better suited to angles situated around fifths of a circle. So if I create something more like a revolving door that won't allow immediate access to either of the exits, instead requiring someone to enter an alcove before rotating the passage again to get out at a different point, I would not only be able to slow them down and tell when they're coming by the rumbling of the rotating section, but because of the size of the alcoves, I'd be able to limit their ability to enter my tunnels to 1 person at a time. So when they reach the end, I'll have plenty of time to get there ahead of them. It'd be like shooting fish in a barrel, though I hope it doesn't have to come to that. Of course, they could do exactly the same thing to me, so some peepholes might be in order. It's exactly like the rotating chamber puzzle on the Dome Island in Riven. I love it. With a plan in place, I got some bamboo and began with the simpler of the 2 doors, consisting mainly of a circular platform and an arch over the top and back of it, with a few sticks for lattice work. I dug out a flat, level hole in the ground for the turntable to sit on, making a groove around the perimeter and a hole in the center for an axle before filling it with concrete. I left some holes in it, though, to mount the rest of the archway on later. I considered filling in the archway with concrete immediately, but then realized it would be so heavy that moving it around to make slight adjustments would be a pain, so I left that for later. In the meantime, I prepared a spot for the turntable to sit in the panic room, making sure it was a little deeper and bigger than I anticipated it needing to be, in case I needed to move it around so that everything would sit perfectly flush. And I filled it with concrete so the turntable would have a sturdy, flat platform to rotate on, leaving a hole in the center where I expected to put the axle later, with some generous wiggle room. I then made some rope, pulleys, and weights, the idea being to use a counterweight to automatically rotate the platform when it's fully depressed, which I can then easily reverse from the opposite side. Before I wrapped up for the day, I took a look at the junction area and took some measurements. It's not going to be as easy as the rotating alcove, where I can just trim out some clay to make everything fit if I needed to, because the walls of the cave are rock. The junction's a bit too big for that anyway, so I plan on making the rotating passage a little smaller than the junction and putting some concrete walls around it, shaped to fit. I decided to spend the remainder of the evening drafting this one up, because it'll need to be kind of precise, and I didn't have a lot of time before bed anyway. I'm getting kind of jazzed about these new construction projects, though I don't expect I'll have time to finish them before the end of the week. Week 30, Day 6. By the time I finished my chores in the morning, the solar kiln was warmed up, so I took my copper ore to the top of the tower and started smelting it into more thin films and wire. Didn't take much longer than an hour. I kind of wanted to get back to my door mechanisms, but I figured the best thing to do was to keep the first thing first, so I collected, cleaned, and filtered a batch of wine diamonds and mixed up a new solution of Rochelle salt to crystallize in the cellar. Should be ready by tomorrow. In the meantime, I cut a piece of bamboo to mount the crystal in and used some of the copper film to build another electrolytic transistor, along with a capacitor that I'll add a resistor to later in order to make a simple RC bandpass filter, just like my radio. The idea is that there are going to be lots of noises in the ocean, and I don't need to hear all of them, just the noises within the frequency range of a boat motor. This got me thinking about how I was going to pipe the sound from the ocean into my bedroom, especially since I didn't want to waste precious wire. I didn't want the hydrophone close to the shore either, otherwise it would constantly be picking up the sound of the waves. I started wondering if perhaps the saltwater pool at the end of the lava tube underneath my base would in fact be an easier place to mount the hydrophone than something like a buoy offshore. I decided to explore this option a little bit, so before I left the workshop, I built some makeshift swimming flippers, in case the tunnel was very long and I needed to swim fast to get back to the air pockets. They consisted primarily of a triangular frame of sticks and cords, wrapped around my feet and ankles, and extending out from the sides, kind of like the shape of a duck's foot, with smooth banana leaves for the webbing, reinforced by tying them in multiple layers to the ribbing of the flippers. I also had the idea to put some of the potassium peroxide I'd been making into a balloon as a backup oxygen source in case I had an emergency. Just let a little water in, and it should start producing bubbles of oxygen gas for me like before. All I had to do was stick a piece of bamboo in the end of the balloon and fill it up. Though I did a quick shallow water test before diving in, just to make sure that it was practical and that I'd gotten the right breathing technique down before using it in a potentially deadly situation. I found that I had to be on top of it and breathe out first to avoid getting a mouth or lung full of water. When I figured I was ready, I cleaned the soot off my goggles, tightened them to make sure they wouldn't leak, put on my flippers, and dove into the submerged tunnel. It reminded me a lot of the Central American cenotes I saw on that one episode of Digging for the Truth. And because this cave apparently gets rainwater in it sometimes, I could see a halocline where the fresh and salt water met, like a pool at the bottom of a pool. Even in the dim lamplight from the cave behind me, it was kind of tantalizing, almost magical in a way I wasn't expecting. I had to keep surfacing in the pool, as I could only hold my breath for about 30 seconds at a time, but I couldn't resist an opportunity to try passing through the halocline. So once I'd practiced and gotten my nerve up a bit, I let out some air from my lungs, like how I used to sink myself to the bottom of the swimming hole when I was a kid, and disturbed the surface of the underwater pond. The water around me shimmered and rippled from the waters of different densities being mixed together turbulently, like some kind of otherworldly portal. That density difference caused the light passing through the halocline to bend, and once I was on the other side, even though it was still quite dark inside the submarine tube, I could make out the blue light of the ocean on the opposite side of the tunnel, which I estimated to be about 200 feet away, though I've never been good at eyeballing distance. Having a rough idea of where the exit was, I decided to try looking at it from the surface, getting in my kayak and paddling out to about the right spot before holding my breath and dunking my head in. It took a while of searching, but I could eventually see a dark hole surrounded by reef. I had the foresight to bring with me a stone and some cord, which I dropped where the hole was. This isn't critical for the hydrophone project, but now I was interested. When I got back to shore, I measured the length of cord I extended and determined the hole to be at a depth of about 40 feet. After that fun bout of exploration, I toweled off and had lunch, quite invigorated, having forgotten all about my previous project. Nevertheless, I decided that the flooded lava tube would be an ideal place for my hydrophone, as the tunnel itself appears to widen the farther out it goes from the island, forming a natural hearing trumpet, and is technically closer to my house than the shore by about 25 feet, in addition to being completely protected from the noise of the lapping waves at the shore. However, I had other projects that required my attention today, so I decided to get back to building the rotating alcove from yesterday, cutting up some bamboo segments for rollers, and resting the turntable on top of them. I installed the frame too, and adjusted the position of the platform until it fit snugly inside the entrance of the escape tunnel, even though I had to trim away some of the clay around the edges to make it fit. I dug out the spot for the axle and secured it in place before hooking up the mechanics and mounting everything on the inside of the passageway. Basically, weights and pulleys on either side of the door, and I can make the door open or close by switching the weight between the pulleys on the left and right sides. For the pressure sensitivity part, I realized I had made a bit of a mistake, since I was planning to put some kind of spring under the turntable to make it compress with increasing weight. But because I didn't know what that weight was, I would have needed to keep removing and adjusting the spring repeatedly from underneath this heavy apparatus, which would have been a pain. So instead, I designed the catch mechanism on the doorway to be the adjustable part. The idea was that there would be a latch holding tight onto a peg sticking out from the turntable, preventing it from moving until the peg was lowered enough to come out from under the catch by the weight on it depressing the springs. Like I said, adjusting the height of the catch seemed to be a much simpler solution, and for the springs, I made a hexagon of connected bamboo bow springs, held taut by twisting the cords that were holding them under tension, offering me at least a small degree of adjustability from behind the apparatus. With everything pretty much as I wanted it, I worked on coating the arch of the alcove with the easily moldable claycrete mixture, having to rotate it around on the turntable to fill in both sides. I took an extra hour at the end of the day filling in little details to not only make the alcove look cool, but also to make it hard to tell that it's supposed to rotate, mostly by making a decorative molding around the edges that made it look like it was installed into the wall and was supposed to be there. However, that also made me think that I would need to give other elements of the panic room, like the arches, the same decorative treatment so it wouldn't stand out as much. However, it was dark enough under the house as it was, and hard enough to see those details by lamplight, not helped by the sun going down, so I took a break on it for the night and got ready for bed. Week 30, Day 7. Sabbath seems to have come quickly for me this week. I guess time flies when you're doing repetitive mining work. I did my morning chores, transcribed my scripture recordings, and listened to the sermon on the radio as usual. I was kind of surprised that my own radio broadcast hadn't gotten some kind of response yet, but I guess it has only been a week. Maybe there just aren't that many boats or planes passing through this part of the ocean. In any case, I collected my Rochelle salt crystal and finished building my hydrophone, coating it with latex and leaving it out in the sun to dry. Once again, I should be taking it easy today, but I've taken it relatively easy all week, and I was still excited about my little mist door in the lava tubes. So after an early lunch, I decided to keep working on it, chopping down some more bamboo and taking it down through the western tunnel entrance, since there was no way for me to realistically get all the material I'd need through the panic room and rotating alcove door. I worked in the lamplight chopping and drilling the bamboo to make the platform for the rotating passage before going back to base to collect the clay, lime, and water necessary to fill the platform in. I tried to use as little material as possible and made it so there was basically a lip around the edge to hold the rollers for the turntable in place. While I was thinking about it, I made the rollers too, not simply out of lengths of bamboo, but by hollowing them out and filling them up with concrete so they would be better able to resist the weight of the platform on top of them. While all of that set, I worked on building some of the framing to go around the rotating passage and keep everything flush with the cavern walls. Once again, I opted for a sort of dome over the top of the chamber for even weight distribution, with columned alcoves around the perimeter. This took me longer than expected, and if it weren't for my coconut watch, I wouldn't have even realized it was getting late. I didn't quite finish this scaffolding before the end of the day, but I wasn't planning on filling it in until after finishing the frame for the rotating passage, again to make sure everything stays flush. Blooper Reel. Back to the blast. Samurai Jack. I spent the requisite waiting hour digging I spent the requisite rating, though it makes me and a hole in the center. Sheesh, this is going to be a short one. Along with a capacitor that I'll add a resistor to later on. Along with a capacitor I'll add to a resistor to that I'll add. So instead, I designed the catch mechanism, holding tight onto a peg sticking out from the dais. That should say turntable, because I apparently don't know the definitions of words. With columned alcoves around the perimeter. That's hard to say. This took me longer than expected to say. I wouldn't have even realized it was getting late. Wait, I said that already. Maybe it's not going to be too short after all. Hey there, thanks for listening all the way to the end. I've got a few more tricks planned for my secret passages, so if you want to find out what I make next, you can press the subscribe and bell buttons to get notified as soon as I'm done building them. Now, I'm not being sponsored by Cyan or anything to keep saying how great their games are. I just like them a lot, and believe in sharing the stuff I like with others who might like them too. In fact, as of the time I'm recording this, they just released Riven in Unreal Engine, so I would definitely recommend trying it out, both the remake and the original, if only to understand where I'm coming from with all these crazy contraptions and why I rave about their games so much. Links in the description. If you feel the same way, it would help me out a lot too if you could do the same, and share this video with someone who you think would enjoy it, and press the like button to tell the algorithm to do some of that sharing on your behalf. Also, if you'd like to chat about some of your stories and perspectives on the episode, maybe something fun you'd like to share with me, or if you've also had a bit of an uneventful or repetitive week that only picked up near the end, feel free to share them in the comments section below. I genuinely love to hear them, and I'm always open to suggestions or corrections. That said, thanks again for listening, and hope to see you here again next week.